Good day, everybody, and welcome back to the IT 101 series from NASTD. My name is Brad Steele, and I'm the Senior Director of Unified Communications with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. But for these purposes, I'm an NASTD past president. NASTD is the National Association of State Technology Directors, and it is made up of technology professionals serving state government. It is a member-driven organization whose purpose is to advance and promote the effective use of information technology and services to improve the operation of state government. When I was president a couple of years ago, I was reading through the articles of NASTD, and Article 1 of the Constitution, Section 2, Purpose and Goals, states that we should engage in programs for the training, education, and development of technology professionals from all areas of state government. While we do a very good job at networking and doing instructional sessions at our meetings, I kind of thought that we had a good opportunity to actually do some training where we hit nuts and bolts on subjects that are understood, as I like to say, or have trouble saying sometimes, or subjects or technologies that are new to state government and new to our users. So in doing that, I put together these 101 series where I asked 10 or so basic questions about a specific technology. And we work with our corporate affiliate council to have our subject matter experts work with us on those technologies and getting us those answers. If you haven't seen the other videos that are available, they can be accessed through nastd.org, our website, and it will bring you over to our YouTube channel where all of the videos can be found. And at this point, there are too many to mention all the topics. So, and our topic today is for application whitelisting. And our subject matter expert for this topic is the Vice President of PCmatic, Corey Munson. Corey has 16 years with PCmatic and is primarily responsible for sales and partner management. And prior to that, he was with Gateway. He lives in Iowa near Iowa State University and is a big fan of Iowa State University athletics. So welcome, Corey.
Thanks, Brad. Great to be with you.
So, you know, the basic thing here, I ask these 10 questions and we try and get into the nuts and bolts. So let's start off with the basic question, the one that I ask first every time. What is application whitelisting?
So application whitelisting is really the technology that is designed to only permit known good software or known good applications to execute on a given endpoint. It's commonly confused with application control, sometimes confused with URL filtering or geo filtering or filtering network traffic. But application whitelisting or application allow listing specifically looks at what's attempting to execute on an endpoint and only allowing known good applications to execute, versus the traditional approach to endpoint security says, we're going to try to block everything we know to be bad. And now we know that's really no longer practical. There's something needed to supplement that. And that's where application allow listing comes in.
Excellent. Yeah, you know, my first security officer that I met at the Commonwealth of Massachusetts once told me that he knew none of my applications were secure because they all worked. So it sounds to me like this is a way to kind of meet somewhere in the middle on that and get it so that we're at least putting some controls around our applications.
Definitely.
So with application whitelisting, how would states in particular or any other organization use application whitelisting?
It's mainly used as a supplement to other pieces of the security stack. So a traditional antivirus product, EDR, XDR, more detect and respond type products that are part of a traditional security stack. This is meant to be a supplement to those types of products. Doesn't mean it can't stand alone and function as an antivirus kind of malware defense mechanism. It definitely can, but it best functions as more a complementary product. And in that respect, could be used for organizations, state agencies of any size and scope. One of the traditional knocks against this approach is it didn't scale very well. Fortunately, some of the more modern approaches to this allow it to scale relatively easily.
And so, in thinking about the URL listing that I know of in the past, there's the option to blacklist or whitelist. What are the benefits of whitelisting as opposed to blacklisting?
The big benefit is if you consider the traditional blacklist approach, especially as it relates to malware, and we're talking about applications and executables, is the traditional approach with blacklisting says we're going to try to maintain a list of all the known bad executables out there. What we know now is those morph so quickly that it's no longer practical to think you can keep that kind of list updated, let alone get it pushed out to all the endpoints that it's potentially supposed to be protecting. So what we're doing is really flipping that paradigm on its head and saying, instead of simply allowing everything to run and attempting to block what we know to be bad, we're going to set this up as default deny. Everything will be denied unless you know it to be good. And so it's definitely a much more effective means of catching these things that are morphing so quickly, or in some cases have never been seen before. If it's never been seen before, you definitely can't stop it through blacklist.
Okay. And for that known good application, what are some of the ways that we can verify an application or know that an application is good?
There's any number of ways. Our team spends a lot of time looking at unknowns, and we're typically looking at digital signatures. So in many cases, many of the more well-known software developers out there will digitally sign their software, and that's something easy to track and easy to follow. There's some legwork involved in some cases. If they don't happen to be digitally signed, our team spends a lot of time sandboxing, and other solutions will spend a lot of time sandboxing and testing these things out. But it's really largely the digital signatures. Unfortunately, we're seeing that many major software developers don't digitally sign, and that adds a level of complexity to this approach. But the more that happens, the easier this process becomes.
Okay. So, the next question that I usually ask, and you touched on this a little bit, what does this supplement or replace within our current infrastructure that we have?
It really cooperates very well with most traditional antivirus products or endpoint security products. Typically, you don't want too many agents on an endpoint because you're running the risk of sucking system resources once that happens. Fortunately, most of the newer approaches or the newer tools like this can coexist rather well with those as a separate agent that exists on the endpoint. And like we mentioned before, can also coexist with detect and respond type tools that may already be part of a stack or firewalls or whatever the case may be. I compare it to being the deadbolt on the door. You've got your lock that's usually associated with your doorknob. This is that deadbolt that some people unfortunately don't realize that they should always use and don't always remember to lock it.
Excellent. So is this, normally as we look at these things, is this a cloud-based application, cloud-based technology, or is it on premises, or can it be both?
Can definitely be both. I would say the majority of the solutions that are out there on the market today happen to be cloud-based. Definitely makes them easier to deal with. But there are on-prem solutions that exist for, I know of some that exist for federal opportunities that are now requiring this approach. We're seeing that through CMMC and some of the other federal standards that are being handed down, application allow listings actually being required. So on-prem kind of coincides with that being rolled out through the federal space.
And does it matter where your data exists? Your applications, if you have on site, is it better to do this on site, or can it all be in the cloud no matter where your data is?
I've seen it function well in either case. I don't think there's a huge advantage one way or another. It's probably easier to deploy, easier to manage if you're talking about something that's cloud-based, but not out of the realm of possibility that you can do it on-prem.
Okay. Now the fun question, right? What are some of the major changes that have happened in this space? Where were we 5 years ago, 2 years ago, and where are we going to be in 2 years from now?
I think the important thing to remember about this approach is it's not new. We're not talking about something that was just invented yesterday. 10, 15 years ago, you could manually implement something like this through Windows natively. What people quickly realized as they tried to do this manually was it was an undertaking to, one, set it up and stand it up and get it deployed, especially if you're talking about multiple endpoints, tens of thousands in some cases. But then on an ongoing basis, attempting to manage this as applications change, as digital signatures change, as hashes that identify these applications potentially change. How are you going to keep track of that to make sure that things aren't being blocked that shouldn't be blocked? False positives, which has always been a knock against this approach, is what if something gets blocked that shouldn't be blocked? So the big change we've seen is moving from the more manual approach being the only option to solutions that now exist that really streamline that to make the deployment and then the ongoing management much more practical. We've seen organizations with IT staff of 1 or 2 people. I've seen it firsthand in school districts who are able to take advantage of this now without having to worry about the need for additional resources or time, really.
Excellent. And as far as going forward, do we see any changes coming in the near future or any enhancements?
I think we're definitely starting to see a shift towards this being more of a requirement in many cases. I've heard anecdotally stories about cybersecurity insurance requirements that are now tied to the need for application whitelisting or application allow listing. I mentioned CMMC before. It's already tied into some federal requirements. I wouldn't be shocked to see some of what we've seen there out of from CMMC, which largely mirrors NIST standards. I would expect to see that trickle down into the state and local level, where it becomes, if not a mandate, something that's strongly recommended. You can't really pick up a CISA bulletin or an FBI bulletin these days without looking through recommendations and seeing this be one of their core recommendations for defending against what's going on. So I think we're going to see an increasing shift towards the authorities really directing people to take a harder look at doing this.
Okay. So as I'm looking to start putting this in place, how long should I plan on the implementation process?
Largely dependent on really how many endpoints you're trying to support with a solution like this. I've seen it range from hours to weeks to potentially months. A lot of it would depend on that initial phase of deployment is largely spent on trying to understand what maybe is proprietary, what happens to be one-off that's already running inside of a particular network that might be blocked by a solution like that, and accounting for those things and getting them added to the whitelist or allow list locally. That's really critical, because that will go a long way towards preventing false positives along the way. If you can identify those things that aren't recognized necessarily as a known good, maybe they're not digitally signed, maybe they've really never been seen before outside of a particular organization. So that's really the variable there that will dictate time. But fortunately, I think that the time to deploy has been dramatically cut down over the past few years with how streamlined the process is through the more modern approach.
And is it an all or nothing kind of thing, or is it something that you can do in parts?
You definitely do it in parts. I've seen organizations that'll approach it on a departmental level. Some will break it down to an individual level. Any number of ways to really do it based on the tools that are available now, and being able to manage it separately as well. So if you know something needs to be added to the allow list for a particular department, you can do that, and other departments don't have the ability to run it. That's where it kind of blends with the application control type of approach, where you're actually controlling department by department or agency by agency who's allowed to run what.
All right, and as we're moving down the path and deciding that this is the direction we want to go, what do we need to know in advance? What should we be putting together so that we can be ready to implement?
I would say if you have visibility now to, and this is obviously a common suggestion, is what visibility do you have to what's currently running on your network, and how much of that do you know to be unique to your own environment there, or at least very limited visibility outside of your environment. The more you know about that, the easier this is going to be to deploy right away and get it rolled out. If you don't know what's running inside your network, and unfortunately that happens a lot, it's going to take a little more time to identify those things and figure out what needs to be included in the allow list and what doesn't. So I would say that's the primary thing that could help expedite deployment is inventory your assets and know exactly what's running inside your environment.
All right. For rolling this out and getting it going, what is the cost model? How would we pay for this?
Typically, it's priced out on an endpoint by endpoint basis, with pretty significant discounts based on the volume of endpoints you're dealing with. But I've seen it be very, very cost effective, even considering this is an addition to the security stack versus replacing something inside the security stack. I think the return on investment and the value that it's bringing versus what it's typically going to cost now has been very, very attractive for most organizations, especially considering how well regarded it is as best practice. How many organizations are recommending it, if not mandating it as well. So fortunately, it prices out very economically for most.
So operational costs, it's per endpoint, et cetera. Is there usually an upfront cost to implement and to get this going?
From what I've seen in most cases, no. I know some solutions offer upgraded support options that would involve an added set of eyeballs that are looking at what's being blocked, what's not being blocked, helping deal with an occasional false positive if something were to come up like that. But very limited upfront cost in terms of deployment or onboarding for most solutions.
Okay. When, obviously this is a security process that you're putting in place, something that's meant to enhance your security, but are there any concerns with doing this around security and other things it may affect?
I don't think from a security perspective, I think it's well regarded enough to for what it is as an added benefit for security. I think the primary concern with this approach will always be its potential impact on continuity as it relates to false positives. What if something's being blocked that needs to be running? And at that point, I think it's critical that you look at, based on the solution you elect to go with, how quickly do you as an administrator have the ability to override what the software may be blocking? And how quickly can you get it added to the allow list or the whitelist so that it's no longer blocked? As long as that is a very quick and streamlined process, I think the risk of false positives is pretty minimal. But the concern is legitimate because this is potentially blocking software along the way that may be needed for whatever function, accounting or otherwise. But fortunately, the process for dealing with that is much better than what it used to be.
Excellent. Well, I told you this would be relatively painless, so we're down to our final question. So the last question I always ask, because I have limited knowledge going into this type of stuff, is what did I forget to ask you? What else do we need to know?
I think we really covered it. I think the thing I'm encouraged by is the renewed interest in this approach that we've seen. And I think considering all the security possibilities and solutions that are on the market, and I think at last count, there's some 5,000 plus vendors out there with any flavor of different protective measure you can put in place. This is really taking a step back to basic blocking and tackling. This is regarded as one of the core critical controls. And I think it speaks to the value of possibly revisiting what those core critical controls are, what some of the basic blocking and tackling we may have overlooked along the way, and maybe have been distracted by some of the shiny security objects that are on the market. I don't think this is an either or type of proposition. There's definitely a place for the more sophisticated approaches out there, but not at the expense of something that's definitely more basic and has been around for quite some time. It's worth taking another look at because it's not, as they say, it's not your father's application allow listing anymore. It's definitely an improvement on that.
Excellent. All right, well, that's the end of the question and answer period. So I thank you very much for your time. For those of you listening, I hope that you have gotten something out of this. I know I did. I always do. As I like to say, if nobody else gets something, at least I'm getting something. So, but hopefully you all are enjoying these series, and please let me know your feedback on what you think about this particular video. Thank you again, Corey. Corey Munson is the Vice President of PCmatic. And thank you to all of the corporate members who have participated in these videos so far. And I look forward to seeing you at the upcoming events for NASTD and see you in person. So thank you very much.